This is going to be a lot of fun. And who are you?
Sometimes I wonder when I wake up in the morning. I'm Rick Smolan. I used to be a photographer. I am still a photographer.
Yep.
I don't do it for a living anymore.
That's why we still have our camera.
Actually, I'm a passionate amateur again because I love photography. I actually miss not being out there and shooting.
You used to work for the National Geographic and shoot
Time,
all sorts of wild things.
New York Times, everybody. I used to shoot for everybody.
Was that like 70s and 80s?
Yeah, I was right out of college. I did my yearbook. I never went to school for photography. I took my yearbook, if you can believe it or not, to Time magazine and got hired on the spot. It turned out there was a guy there, a wonderful guy named John Derniak, who looked for one hungry, starving photographer every year and would basically give them an assignment they had no background or qualifications for and throw them out in the middle of the lake and see what would happen. Yeah.
These are okay. Let's keep
Yeah.
going.
Okay.
So,
You know, we're in the middle of an interview, so you need to come back.
One
Can you get Mom? Mom's trying to open the door.
well, this actually leads into what we were here to talk about, which is your latest book. that
Yeah,
you published,
home.
American
Welcome
Home.
to home.
And
I
I'm
guess
glad
that's
we
what-
got to see your home
Right,
life.
total thrilling circus here.
So, how many kids do you have?
I have two kids.
you'll
Sometimes
see
it
them
feels
come
like
through
15 sometimes.
And your wife is coming in?
Jesse's just turning 6,
yeah.
and Phoebe's 8. Jennifer is always 23. She's been 23 since the day I met her. Jennifer and I have been producing these big photography projects for many years where we invite the best photographers in the world, people we think are the best, our heroes, our peers, some young photographers. And every year we come up with a different concept. We have this, and we say, this year let's look at microprocessors or the internet or the global water crisis or how the human race is learning to heal itself. And this year we looked at the concept of home, what the word home means to people.
Well, I think the first time I remember seeing your name was in the America Day in the Life books, the
Right.
Day in the Life of America, which
Series.
is really an iconic book. You probably sold a lot of copies of that.
Yeah, it was actually.
I saw it in a lot of people's homes
It was-
over the years.
It was the first time in history that a coffee table book became the #1 book for the year, #1 in the New York Times. It was kind of amazing.
Wow.
Sold 1.4 million copies in a market where 20,000 was a bestseller.
Yeah. And you have a tie to the tech industry too, because I seem to remember you doing a lot of CD-ROM projects in the early 80s or early 90s and late 80s or something like that.
Yeah, I like to think of that what we do. Our company is called Against All Odds Productions for sort of obvious reasons, as our conversation will go on here. But I like this idea of using state-of-the-art technology to do creative storytelling, so that there's a gimmick to some of our projects, but there's a really strong underlying editorial basis to what we're doing. So it's not just, it's a CD-ROM. It's a CD-ROM that makes you feel like you're there in the middle of this adventure, this story, whatever the book is about. Yeah. So Apple and eBay and Google and Adobe have been our sponsors over many years, and we've actually seeded the photo community with lots of products that sort of a lot of people had not heard about before. Photographers, believe it or not, at one point couldn't figure out why they would need a computer. Yep. When we started doing these projects.
I remember being at the Photo Marketing Association show, because I used to help run a camera store in the 80s.
Yeah.
In 89, which was right around when Photoshop came out, and the first digital cameras were just getting into beta, and they were really crappy cameras, right? It was like the Apple QuickTake,
yeah, I remember that.
which was 640 by 480 black and white. Yeah. I think it was 16 different shades of gray, or 256.
Amazing.
But, I mean, a really crappy camera compared to the day. And I remember being in the Kodak booth, and the employees were going, "This world, who needs digital?" And the world is always going to be film. And
I have to admit that I actually was a Luddite for a long time. I love the technology, but I always wanted my Nikons and my Leicas. I always thought digital will never look the way film looks. My brother is a TV director out in Hollywood, and he tells me they actually shoot on film and then transfer it over to video. And I said, why? Why would you just shoot on video? And he said, at least until recently, they couldn't get video to have the same kind of feeling. The soap operas, they have this kind of weird flatness and they're overlit. That's what I always thought digital photography looked like. It was like too sharp, too much information. I mean, one of the things that's nice about black and white, if you're an old black and white person, is that you kind of fill in the dots. I mean, it's sort of, you give people enough information, but then for me, what I love about art is this idea that it's sort of like the Mona Lisa. What's it mean? So you and the work of art combined. It's a Bob Dylan song. It's not just that's what it is. It's open for interpretation. And black and white to me is much more like that. It's sort of magical. But now I'm in love with digital. Now the ability to have a 5-stop range and to fix color cast and to
still do black and white, right?
And still, that's right, yeah. And turn it back into
Thomas Hawk, we were up at Yosemite with Ansel Adams' son, and we were shooting their 5Ds, and he just turned everything black and white, and it just turns into that Ansel Adams look.
Amazing, isn't it? There's something about black and white that just, I don't know if it's the stuff of dreams. There's something about it that people respond to in a very different way than they do to color photography.
Yeah. Good old Tri-X.
Yeah, I hope they keep making it. It's scary.
I haven't used it in more than a decade now, but I remember.
You wonder who's buying it. I mean, it must be a very small coterie of hardcore, Mary Ellen Mark and. Did
you ever load your own film, or did you?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, no.
So you buy
when I was a kid,
30-meter rolls.
Yeah, and you put it and you spoon it out and you try to get a few extra frames because you could, and then people would say, "Don't do that because it might scratch the film." Worrying about X-ray machines going through the airport if your film was fogged. I had friends, Philip Jones Griffiths, who sadly passed away recently, used to buy a lot of Kodachrome and look at the lot number and test it for all of us, and then say you need to warm it up or cool it down. I mean, it's a half a stop hotter than the last batch of Kodachrome. I mean, some of these photographers were just incredibly meticulous about everything. He had no latitude with slide film at all.
Nope.
Now you've got 5 stops.
No.
I love it.
You had a third of a stop with slide film, right?
Yeah, it was amazing. And just the ability now, I was, probably everybody knows about this except me, I was reading something that if you do a family photograph and you've got 10 pictures and someone's always blinking in every one of the shots, there's some version of Photoshop Elements now that basically lets you circle each person and say, this is the face I want, and it assembles them completely seamlessly as long as the background of the picture is kind of the same setup. Very cool. I saw this up at Microsoft a couple of years ago at that
we actually,
conference.
Rocky and I went to Stanford's photography research, the computer science department, and they showed us the technology that does that. So it's really incredible what they're doing. Did you see the Yosemite GigaPan project?
What is that?
They have a robot that takes a 5D and takes hundreds of photos and does a panoramic. Like you could do a panoramic.
Oh, so you can actually look around. They have it's on the wall, so you can turn around and see the whole thing. And incredible
but
detail.
It's a gigapixel image because it stitches them all together and makes it look like one big image. And they shot 20 in Yosemite Valley all on the same day, and now they're mapping those images onto a 3D model of the valley, so you're going to be able to fly down the valley and see it sort of how it looks. Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, just what a wonderful time to be alive. Yeah. I mean, not just photography, everything. There's so many things right now that are happening that are really borderline magic. Yeah. We all take it for granted.
People who are watching Fast Company are probably going, "Why do you have a photographer on it?" You've really innovated in terms of business and in terms of making photography something else, right? Show the people the book.
This is our brand new book. It's called America at Home, and it actually represents some interesting technology. It certainly represents digital photography. We send 100.
Is this all digital?
Everything's digital. Yep. Yeah. We're
no more
converted
film
now, unfortunately. Yeah. But in addition to professional photographers, we had 100 photographers for a week all over the United States, photographing not architectural digests, but photographing sort of the emotions of home, rituals, ceremonies, how people sort of turn their dwellings into their homes. And what's interesting about this book is, first of all, not only do we have professional photographers, but we invited the public to participate. So we gave out assignments every day, and people could sign up and photograph morning madness in your house, or evening rituals, or giving a tour of your home, whatever. The idea was, if 100 years from now your great-grandchildren pick this book up, what would you show them about what life was like? What did your family do at home? How did you live your life? But the other thing that's very cool is that if you have an old photograph of the house you grew up in, or a picture of your great-grandparents back in the early 1900s, or a brand new picture of your baby in front of your house, you can upload a picture to our website, which is www.myamericaathome.com. And when you get this book, instead of this cover, you get this cover, which happens to be my daughter Phoebe, and you get a replacement dust jacket with all the reviews from the Today Show and CNN. But down here at the bottom, it says photo by Rick Smolan. Here's Phoebe, reading a silly book sitting in our window just before she turned 8. And people have gone crazy over this. Oprah Winfrey did a show a couple years ago when we first invented this technology for our other book.
And anybody can do this.
Yeah, and it's free. You come to our website, and if you order the book from us, you get this wraparound replacement dust jacket for free. You can also buy it at Amazon and order the dust jacket afterwards. But this is sort of the first time in the history of publishing where you have a New York Times bestseller with a personalized, individualized skin around it. And people are as proud of the caption and the photo credit as they are of the photograph. It's really fun.
That's cool. And it shows you what you can do now with a new technology business, because this is also a website that your team built to enable you to come and put that image up.
You get to crop the pictures. You can take a horizontal picture and turn it into a vertical picture so it fits. Yeah. It's just fun for people.
What does that mean to the coffee table book industry? Because obviously, if you have a coffee table, you want to have your own photos on the book. It starts a conversation. Right?
Well, I think when people walk in, first of all, it looks like it's really the cover. It's got the logo over it. It's not just a photograph slapped onto the cover, and the quality is exactly the same as this bookstore version. This whole idea of just-in-time printing and personalized technology, one-offs, is really come of age. Where now it's affordable to produce a dust jacket like this for a book. So it's a merging of professionally photographed and printed and researched and written content. Together with passionate amateur photography. I mean, everybody has a camera now, and people are so good at it. And the other thing that's nice is we have these wonderful essays from Amy Tan and David Pogue and Dominique Browning and Matt Groening from The Simpsons, giving these really wonderful little insights of what it was like growing up inside their house. Matt talks about the fact that people always tell him how brilliant he is for creating The Simpsons, and he said, Homer was my father's name, and Homer is my dad. I mean, basically, he created this about his own dysfunctional family. So it's really fun. Just the whole book feels like you've been invited to wander around inside of other people's homes. Yeah. It's cool.
How did you get into photography? What was the initial impulse for you?
My wife refuses to believe this, but I was incredibly shy when I was a kid. I was painfully shy. And my dad gave me a camera when I was 16, and I could suddenly talk to people for the first time. It gave me an excuse to walk up and insert myself into situations. She still claims I hide behind my camera when we're in social situations. But I did the yearbook in high school and college, and I was just really lucky. As I said, there was a guy at Time magazine who gave me a chance I shouldn't have gotten. And every time that I got hired by a magazine and they paid me for a day, I'd work for a week. I would just shoot for another 5 days because I wanted to blow the editors away. I just wanted to, I saw every one of these as maybe my last opportunity. So at first I actually used to do assignments, and if they didn't run my photographs, I wouldn't bill them, because a lot of times magazines will have 2 or 3 times as many articles assigned for an issue than they actually run. And anyway, I ended up getting hired by Time. I went out to Asia. I got sent to Australia. I worked for National Geographic. And I was very lucky because within about 5 years, I was always with other photographers, sitting in bars at night. And all these other photographers would bitch and moan about their editors. They hated who they worked for, and they would just cuss about the people they worked for. And I said, I was like 26 years old, and I said, guys, I mean, someone's paying me $400 a day, and I'm meeting presidents and prime ministers and renting Learjets, and you're complaining? This is so cool. We're getting to be the world's eyes. What's the problem? And I realized after being out there for a while that we would all fall in love with our stories. We all hope that if we took these pictures, it would change this situation that we were looking at. It would change someone's life. It would alter some injustice. And then very often when the magazine ran the story, it wasn't through anyone's fault, but basically a lot of us felt that the magazines were doing connect the dot stories. Like somebody else had done that story 2 years ago, so now they're looking for our photographs to kind of reinforce their preconceived idea of that story. So one day I was sitting in a bar in Bangkok with a bunch of photographers, and I said, wouldn't it be cool if we could invite our heroes, our peers, some young photographers, fly them all to Australia, where I was living at the time, spread them around the country and say, on your mark, it said go, you got 24 hours. And we would do this book ourselves, we would publish it ourselves, and we would, so I went to, all my friends said, great, you organize it, we'll all come. So I went to 35 publishers, and they laughed me out of their offices. They said, what a stupid idea. Who is going to pay $50 for some book of pictures that your friends take in some godforsaken country like Australia? Why would that be interesting? And I said, the world's best photographers let loose, and nobody was interested. So I went to the Prime Minister of Australia, because I photographed him a lot. He loved photographers. I said, I want to do this book, and would you pay for it? It's a book about your country. And he said, no, nice try. He said, but I'm going to give you a great idea. And I thought, okay, he's just sort of shining me on. He said, no, listen. He said, first of all, I'm going to give you a letter saying I endorse your project. And I said, okay, thank you. He said, okay, listen. He said, here's the idea. Tell people you're doing the Olympics of photography. I said, what do you mean? He goes, okay, go to this guy, Steve Jobs, that just started this company called Apple. This is 1980. He said, tell him you're doing the Olympics of photography, and Apple can be the exclusive sole sponsor, computer sponsor of your project. Go to Kodak and ask them for film. Go to Qantas Airlines, ask them for airline tickets. And I said, and why would they give me all this stuff? He said, because you're going to put their logo on the first page of your book. And I said, no, I don't want to start doing ads. He said, no, it's not an ad. It's like a PBS special. The following book is brought to you courtesy of. So I went to see Steve, and I went to see Kodak, and to my astonishment, everybody not in publishing said, wow, one day in a country like Australia with the best photographers in the world. So we couldn't find a publisher. We self-published it. We were sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor in Melbourne in my friend's apartment, and it became the #1 book in Australia. Self-published. We're not even in bookstores. We could only sell it through a newspaper group. And it launched, now we've sold 5 million copies over the last, 25 years. And we've been very fortunate. All of our books have been sponsored. IKEA sponsored America at Home. There's no product placement in here. There's no advertising. It's just a very classy 30,000 foot. IKEA thinks that home's the most important place in the world, and here's a way they're letting you, feature your family. So
Seagate does the same thing for my show. So.
Well, Christo's my hero. I think Christo does these big, crazy projects. He gets other people to pay for them. He controls his vision. And if anybody compared anything of what we do to anyone else, we're like little mini Christos. We have these crazy ideas, and somehow we get people to fall in love with them. And again, we used to do topics like countries, and at first that seemed hard. And then we started thinking, the global water crisis. Like, here's something we could really apply.
That's this book.
So this is the other book we did this year. It's the first time that Jennifer and I have done 2 books in the same year. We actually did 3. We did UK at Home too. That's another story. But this was a 1 month look at how the human race is running out of water. Yeah. And it sounds like a deadly topic. When someone first told me about it, it sounded like one of those really important topics that you look for someone else to talk to at the cocktail party when they mention the global water crisis. It's like, okay, thank you. It turned out to be probably the most interesting book we've ever done.
Show me some of the.
Yeah, I will. I mean, some of the pictures in here. Let's see if I can jump to, some of them are pretty timely. The opening spreads are amazing. Look at this. So there's 1 billion people on our planet right now, basically like that. There's 1 billion people on this planet that don't have access to clean drinking water. 1 out of every 5 people. And right now we're pulling water out of the ground 4 times faster than it's going back in. So, if you were taking money out of the bank, out of your bank account 4 times faster than going in, you'd be pretty freaked out, and yet no one's paying any attention to this. What's also really interesting is the seas are drying up. I mean, you can see this everywhere in the world. We're using water for many, many different purposes beyond drinking. We have the same amount of water available today that was available when the dinosaurs were roaming the Earth. It's a finite amount. It's about 3% of all the water on Earth is drinkable. 2% of it's frozen in glaciers. So 1% is drinkable. And when we had 500 million people on the planet, it wasn't a problem. But today, it's becoming a huge problem. This is a picture in China. 70% of the rivers in China don't support life anymore. Yeah. Nothing is alive in these rivers.
I've been to China, and you never really understand pollution until you're there. The rivers are brown, and they physically stink when you walk over them. Right? It's like an open sewer.
And yet, there's more people in China than anywhere else in the world, and the population is growing like crazy. People are desperately digging for water. The water tables are sinking all over the world. In Mexico City, the roads are going like this because all the moisture is being sucked out of the ground. These are people desperately digging for water. A lot of people believe, and I agree with them, that water is going to become the source of wars in the future, the way that oil has been until recently. That this is going to become a commodity. I mean, you can get along without oil for a little bit longer than you can without water. So, I mean, what's amazing about this book is it's not just a big negative, book about, oh my gosh, this is such a disaster, another thing the human race has made a mess of. It's actually telling you about people who are actually addressing this problem, who are trying to solve the problem. So we have people like Dean Ornish, Dean Kamen.
Yeah. Who did the Segway.
Who invented this amazing device the size of a small refrigerator. You can put one end in a cesspool and clean water comes out the other side. A wonderful story of a farmer in India, and I can show you these pictures afterwards if you want to cut to this. This farmer, in addition to being a farmer, sold popsicles to children in his off hours. So he used to carry these rolls of plastic that he would put sugared water into and freeze them, and every 6 inches there was perforations where he would tear them after it was frozen. And one day he was out in his fields working, and one of these kind of light bulbs went off, and he thought, I wonder if I snaked this plastic popsicle wrappers around my plants and ran water through it, the water would leak out where the perforations were. So he invented this $20 drip irrigation system, this revolutionizing agriculture in the developing world. So before it was $20,000, and now it's $20. So there's all, Steve Case from AOL and his wife Jean are behind this thing called play pumps, where they have these roundabouts where children spin around like a merry-go-round, and while they're doing it now, it pumps water out of the ground up into huge cisterns. In many places in the world, the water's there, they just don't have the technology to drill to it. Yeah. In other places like China, the water is just so polluted, you can't drink it even if you could get to the water. So the problem is different from country to country, and that's one of the things we try to address in the book.
Yeah, it's a real important book, and it certainly started a lot of conversations at conferences I go to and stuff like that.
I mean, who's going to buy it? I don't know, but we were very fortunate again. There's the Blue Planet Run Foundation paid for it. I mean, in my business right now, I don't understand how anybody can do a book without it being sponsored. Yeah. And the challenge is keeping...
Especially one of this kind of quality.
These beautiful,
Because this costs, you told me $2.5 million to publish this book?
Yeah, it was
and I know the book publishing industry, if you're going to sell, let's say, even a New York Times best-selling book will sell 500,000 copies. Well,
you'd have to sell a lot of these to break even.
Yeah, you would break even at 500,000, and the number of books that sell 500,000 copies is like
it's tiny.
1 out of a million.
Yeah, it's infinitesimal. We've been very lucky. We've had, I think, 5 New York Times bestsellers to date, but you never know. And certainly topics like water or medicine, those are kind of lofty. I mean, we actually make them very human and very interesting. We were incredibly excited that Robert Redford wrote the introduction to the book. And he made a wonderful point in the introduction, which is that I think a lot of people, and myself included, I've always assumed that we're these little tiny puny human beings and nature's great, and somehow we could just keep pouring all of our filth, whether it's industrial filth or whatever, into the oceans, into the rivers, and nature will just recycle it and make it clean again. Well, it turns out that's not happening anymore. There's too many of us. Just the way that we're destroying the air with global warming, this global water crisis is actually coming much faster than anyone suspects. Yeah. And I actually think a better title for this book would have been We're All Downstream, because I think everybody assumes it's somebody else's problem. And now it turns out, just the way Thomas Friedman writes about the world is flat, we're all connected. There's no way, the air blows across country borders. Water is not making its way across borders.
Not only that, but if there's really a major problem somewhere, that the people move, right?
That's right.
And so they're going to come to where you are, and then you're going to have two problems, right? Dealing with all sorts of refugees. I mean, when I was a kid, I saw the Vietnam boat people come over. They came however they could come, and they didn't care that they didn't have any money.
That's right.
They just built a little raft and came, you know, and then you have to deal with them, right? You have to deal with them medically, societally, and then we're running out of water in California, you know, without having refugees coming in and trying to get our water.
That was my other assumption. I assumed that this was a problem for those poor people over there, and I don't mean to be, you know, mean about it. I thought, well, when the foundation came to me to do this book, I thought, well, after the third picture of women carrying buckets of water on their shoulders, what else is there to show? Turns out there's an awful lot to show, and the story is so dramatic. And I mean, I think people have been stunned when they've opened this book because it just doesn't sound like an interesting topic. Yeah. And then they go, how come I'm not hearing about this in the media? And what's interesting to me is we sent out 1,000 copies of this book to reviewers and we got 3 reviews. Yeah. The media just yawned. I mean, no one is interested in this topic. And thank goodness for Al Gore, because that, you know.
Why did he break through? What was it about his
message? I think there's something about, you know, it's sort of the fallen hero. I mean, I think that he used his visibility. I mean, what a comeback story. I mean, I kind of think of him and Steve Jobs in kind of interesting ways.
He used a movie, a PowerPoint deck, and a book.
Yeah, he did.
Together.
He did a great job. I mean, I had sort of, you know, hopes that this could become the sequel to An Inconvenient Truth. So far, it hasn't happened, but. I was very honored that Chris Anderson at the TED conference gave it out to every one of those, you know, the 1,000 people that attend that conference. It's a pretty amazing group of people. So that's the approach we're making right now. The other thing that's incredible is I went to Jeff Bezos at Amazon and said, Jeff, I'd love to give the Blue Planet one away for free. He said, like, what are you, nuts? I said, well, I can't afford to print them and give them away, but could we put a PDF on Amazon on the same page where we're trying to sell the book and give the entire book away for free? And he said, I can do it, but why would you want to do that? You're going to totally cannibalize your sales. And I said, we didn't do this book to try to make money or even break even. We're trying to get this message out. So I think it's the only book on Amazon where you can go to the Amazon page and you can download the entire book for free.
Do you know how many people have done that?
No, it's funny. I just actually wrote to the one we were working with there yesterday saying I'd love to know. I think it's a lot from what they were telling me, but I'd love to have the actual number.
I didn't even know that. That's a great...
It'd be interesting to see the statistics of books bought versus, you know, if 100,000 students around the world would download it. We're just trying to get people to wake up and say, this is, you know, they're building retirement communities in Arizona in places where they know there will be no water in 10 years. But the developers have no responsibility for providing water. That's the local municipality. So again, it's this feeling like it's not my problem. I'll let somebody else worry about it. It's so unbelievably irresponsible. And this is happening all over the world. We are running out of water. And
does the book have any solutions for the problem? Well, is it turning seawater into?
Well, it's funny. I thought these are great questions. I thought, like you, well, some brilliant scientist will just find a way to take the whole ocean and make it drinkable. Turns out that if you desalinate more than 7% of the ocean, it kills everything in the other 93%, because the ocean, like most of nature, is this very delicate balance. In order to distill the water out, you actually have to run water through the processors. You don't just take all the stuff and dump all the minerals or the chemicals on the land someplace. So it actually changes the balance of the ocean. So that's not a long-term solution. There are lots of things in this book, and in fact, Philip Moffat, who used to be the editor and owner of Esquire magazine, is a very good friend of mine. I always turn to him first when we start doing these books because he has this great, brilliant editorial mind. And I started talking to him about this, and he said, the one thing you can't do is put all the good news in the last chapter because nobody will ever get to it. You need to weave together the problem and the solution as you go through the book. And that was great advice, because along the top of every page there's a little minus red sign with a sort of a negative statistic, and then on the right side of the page there's a green sort of plus sign and a little like apple-like bubble telling you about some good news that's out there. So there's people that are, you know, stopping dams, coming up with these, you know, the farmer with the irrigation, finding ways of using more water more efficiently. It's a fascinating topic, but it's one we got to be paying attention to right now before it's too late.
That's really what's magical about photography. You can really, just by putting a few images in front of people, change what they're thinking, what their view of the world.
It's hard to argue with a picture.
Have you been to the museum in Washington, D.C.? Have you been in the Pulitzer room? They have a room of all the
pictures
Pulitzer.
That changed.
And that's what I'm thinking of, is these iconic photos that have changed history by just...
Well, you know, Eddie Adams' picture in Vietnam of the street shooting in Saigon that won the Pulitzer, or Nick Ute's picture of the girl with napalm running. There's so many pictures like that. Abu Ghraib, right? I mean, and you can read about this. People say, well, you know, that didn't really happen in somebody's opinion. But when you see the picture, you know, even with Photoshop and all the accusations of what you can do to manipulate pictures, you see a picture and it just, it's really hard to argue with the fact that this is really happening. I mean, you see these kids walking on the water pipe in this horrible slum in Bombay. It speaks so much more than just reading about the statistics of how many people don't have water, because you're looking at a human being and you can't help but look at a child and say, that could be my kid. Yeah. So I think it reaches into you in a way where you can't put up sort of the mental shields that you can when you're reading about something.
Yeah. We're sitting here in New York City and right next to Central Park. Tell me what you go out and shoot. You know, I mean, this is a great place to go and shoot.
It's a wonderful people-watching city. I find New Yorkers to be very comfortable when you photograph them. It's funny, people always say, how do you walk up to strangers and take pictures and don't they get angry at you? And my father-in-law is Elliot Erwitt, who's my hero since I was very young, and you never get a sense of that he was even in the room when you look at his photographs. And I always, the advice I give to people if you want to be a photographer are two things. One is, if you are with people and you shoot lots and lots and lots of pictures, eventually they stop posing and making faces and they get bored with you basically, and then they go back to who they are. And so eventually they just tune you out, because, you know, if you're there for 2 or 3 hours taking pictures, they just ignore you. And the second thing is, if you see people on the street and you photograph them and if they ever get upset, I mean, I photograph people, you know, candids all the time. I never ever run away. I always walk right over and say, I'm so, you know, sorry, I didn't mean to get you upset. You look just like my grandmother. I mean, you say something nice to them that puts them at ease. I never want someone to feel like I was when people get angry, usually it's because they feel like they're being ridiculed. Yeah. So I make sure, even when I'm in foreign countries, if I don't speak, I'll still say it in English. I'll walk up to somebody, and even if I'm in a totally different culture and they don't understand a word I'm saying, you know, you're smiling, you're looking in their eyes, you're not pulling back, but you're going up and saying, oh, sorry. You know, and I show that now I can actually, you know, show them the back of the camera and show them how interesting they are. But the word, if you look kind of guilty and slunk away, you know, that's the worst thing you can do for me. Yeah. Only once did I have anybody actually, try to take me out for having taken their picture.
It's happening more and more around the world. We're having a big discussion on Friend Feed and on Flickr right now, because you go into museums a lot of times, they don't like letting you take pictures, or people out in the street think you're a pedophile if you take a picture of their
children.
Kid.
I know.
So it's becoming more and more of a problem, and certainly because 9/11, taking pictures of certain things gets sensitive. So it'll be interesting to see how photographers have to work through some of these issues and change people's minds.
Well, do you remember the first time you heard the phrase "always on"? Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, what an interesting concept. My babysitter a couple years ago was from Sri Lanka, and we had a cottage next to our house, and I walked in there one night just to ask her a question about the next day, and she was talking to somebody, but she was by herself. I said, I'm sorry, were you talking to somebody? And I had set up Skype for her so she could talk to her husband in Sri Lanka, and she left it open 24 hours a day. So they would actually have dinner together and breakfast together, and the connection was just left open. And I thought, what an interesting, I mean, I'd never actually thought of doing that before because it was free, you know, computer to computer. And I thought, what if cameras become that? I mean, what if battery is not the problem anymore? And what if all of our cameras are constantly recording, our glasses are recording the world? Just if that, you know, there's going to be a time where you can do that. I mean, now, you know, cop cars have a constantly recycling, like, you know, 5-minute loop now.
Justin Kahn in San Francisco did Justin TV, where he wore a camera and wore.
That's right, years ago. Yeah, I remember that.
Just a few years ago, and I don't know that we're ready for that as a culture.
Well, I'm not sure I want it, but I mean, yeah. if it's free, ubiquitous, and everything's being recorded all the time. You know, in downtown San Jose right now, that if there's a gunshot, they've got microphones all over the city, so they can triangulate down to like 2 feet.
I didn't know that.
So the cops know in a second. Instead of the sound bounced off a wheel, I mean, they know exactly where that gunfire came from by triangulating it. And this is actually 10-year-old technology now.
Wow.
So there are microphones everywhere now, and there are cameras everywhere now. So,
but
you know, I'm not saying it's good or bad.
Yeah, there's something. I mean, it's
creepy.
I like being able to choose the moments when I record, because then we have a contract and we're able to control that. And something about taking a still picture makes me choose the moment I capture.
I'm with you, but you know what? I'm hearing all these terrifying things now from the news media, which is, well, we don't need still photographers. We just have our video guys shoot, and we'll pull frame grabs out. It's good enough, you know, to put on the New York Times or in a magazine. And
that's true. These cameras are very high resolution.
So the editor back in the edit bay is now becoming the photographer in effect, because he or she is choosing the frame that represents that situation. So I'm not in favor of that at all. I think that you know, being there and listening and deciding is my job as a photographer, and it's not some editor who wasn't even in the room at the time. But I think more and more that's sort of where the news media is leaning.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel very lucky. I also kind of feel a little bit like a dinosaur, because I don't know what the role of coffee table books are. I mean, every time I fill out my car now, I bought 2 coffee table books. You know, years ago, our books cost, you know, $50, and today they cost $50 almost 30 years later. Yeah. Like, we can't charge more for them. In fact, everyone's trying to get us to charge less, but they cost more to produce. It's like the only product I can think of where the prices kind of remain flat or even going down. So I wonder right now what young people in photojournalism school are going to do when they get out. There's blogging, which is great.
Flickering, but you know, Franz Lanting showed a way to get out and build an experience around photography, which is he uses music, and he tells poetry, and he tells a story, but he shot 30 years worth of great images.
Right, and how much can you charge, and how many people can see it? And,
yeah.
You know.
It's a real problem. It's a problem that we argue out every time we get a group of photographers together at a conference. How are we going to pay for people to make content? It's the same thing I'm arguing out. How are you going to pay to have us fly around the world with 2 video cameras?
Do you know MediaStorm? Brian Storm has this website, won an Emmy for best broadband, you know, photojournalism, and it's great. He does, you know, sort of audio. It's still photographs brought to life through interviews and music and some animation, and it's back to what Life magazine used to be when I was growing up. It's giving you a perspective on something you knew nothing about, but you're hearing the voices of the people in the photographs, and the photographer. It's usually, you know, one photographer with a very strong viewpoint. But I don't know how he makes money doing it. I mean, it's wonderful, and millions of people are looking at it. But as a financial model, I think it's really tough.
It is really tough.
You know.
Well, thanks for giving us a little look into your home. It's great.
Thanks a lot.
It's a great home, and the light is just starting to come out, so we can go take some images and
it's wonderful.
go on a photo walk. So.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.